The pit had been forgotten long before anyone in Ash Hollow was born. Old men pointed toward the broken quarry only when they wanted to frighten children into staying close to home. Hunters crossed themselves whenever their paths wandered near its crumbling cliffs. Shepherds hurried their flocks away before sunset, whispering that the earth there had swallowed more than stones. Some claimed the place was cursed. Others insisted the Alpha King's wolves guarded whatever slept beneath it. No one truly knew. Then, on a cold morning wrapped in drifting mountain mist, the silence broke. Not with a roar. Not with thunder. But with the tiny, desperate cries of frightened wolf pups echoing from somewhere deep below the earth. Dozens of people passed within hearing distance. None stopped. Some pretended they had heard nothing. Others heard enough to walk even faster. They feared the wolves more than they pitied the helpless. Only one young woman slowed her steps. She turned toward the sound with a basket of firewood balanced against her hip, her brow tightening as another weak cry floated through the cold wind. She had no sword. No armor. No family waiting to rescue her. Only a heart that had never learned how to walk away from suffering. Minutes later, she tied a rough rope around her waist and stepped over the broken edge of the abandoned pit. Far below, 8 snow-white wolf pups trembled beneath shattered timber. High above, enormous white wolves stood silently around the opening, watching her descend. None of them growled. None tried to stop her. And hidden beyond the trees, another pair of ancient silver eyes watched the young woman with quiet disbelief, as though destiny had finally arrived wearing nothing more than worn boots and a patched wool cloak. Winter always arrived early in Ash Hollow. The mountain village rested beneath towering grey cliffs where the sun disappeared long before evening, leaving narrow stone streets wrapped in blue shadows. Thin trails of smoke curled from crooked chimneys, carrying the comforting scent of pine wood and fresh bread across rooftops dusted with snow. Chickens scratched beside frozen fences, children chased one another between wooden cottages, and somewhere beyond the village, the endless frostwood forest stretched across the mountains like a sea of silent white. Life here was never easy. Every loaf of bread was earned through hard hands. Every winter survived was counted as a blessing. Among the villagers lived a young woman named Mara. She owned little enough that her entire life could fit inside one modest cottage built against the hillside. Its roof leaked whenever heavy rain came. The fireplace smoked more than it warmed, and the shelves were rarely full. Yet no traveler ever left her doorway hungry. No injured animal was turned away. No lonely child ever found the door locked. The neighbors often wondered how someone with so little always found something to give. That morning she stepped outside carrying a bundle of chopped firewood across her shoulders. The cold bit through the worn wool of her cloak, and each breath drifted into the air like pale smoke. She paused beside a frozen bird lying beneath an oak tree. Its tiny wing hung at an awkward angle. Most people would have walked past. Instead, Mara knelt carefully, removing one glove despite the freezing air. Her fingers trembled as she gently lifted the frightened creature into her hands. "There now," she whispered softly. "You're still fighting." The bird fluttered weakly but did not try to escape. She wrapped it inside the folds of her scarf before continuing toward old Widow Ellen's cottage, where a small fire already glowed through frosted windows. Widow Ellen smiled the moment she opened the door. "You've brought more wood again. You'll need it tonight." "And what about you?" Mara only smiled. "I still have enough." The old woman looked toward the nearly empty bundle and knew that wasn't true. But she had learned long ago that arguing with Mara was like arguing with snowfall. Kindness simply continued falling. By midday, clouds gathered over the mountains. Dark, heavy, silent. A bitter wind swept through frostwood forest, bending ancient pine trees until snow slipped from their branches in glittering waves. The storm that had raged through the night had left scars everywhere. Broken limbs littered the trails. Fresh landslides had carved ugly wounds into the mountainside. Several hunters returned early, their faces unusually pale. Inside the village tavern, worried voices drifted through the warm air. The quarry collapsed. "I saw half the cliff come down." "Good. No one should be near that cursed place." An older hunter leaned closer to the fire. "My grandfather told me the old hunting pit beneath those cliffs was dug before the kingdom even had a king." Someone laughed nervously. And now? The hunter stared into the flames. They say the Alpha King's wolves still remember it. The room fell quiet. Everyone knew the stories. For generations, travelers disappearing in the northern mountains had blamed the Frostfang wolves. Parents warned children that glowing eyes watched from the forest after sunset. Merchants carried silver charms whenever they crossed the mountain roads. No one spoke the Alpha King's name unless absolutely necessary. Whether he truly existed no one could prove. But the wolves were real. Massive white shapes were sometimes seen watching distant roads before vanishing into snowfall without leaving so much as a footprint. No hunter who valued his life ever chased them. Mara listened only long enough to collect a sack of flour she had promised to deliver across the village. Fear had never interested her as much as truth. As afternoon settled over Ash Hollow, she chose the narrow forest path instead of the main road. It was quieter. The snow muffled every footstep beneath her boots. The scent of pine filled the cold air while tiny flakes drifted lazily through shafts of fading sunlight. Everything felt peaceful. Until she heard it. A faint cry. Barely louder than the wind. She stopped. Silence returned. Perhaps she had imagined it. She took another step. Again. A tiny whimper. High. Weak. Desperate. Not a fox. Not a bird. Not any sound she had heard before. She slowly turned toward the western ridge where the abandoned quarry lay hidden beyond broken spruce trees. Another cry floated upward. Then another. Several together this time. Her heartbeat quickened. She followed the sound through knee-deep snow, climbing over fallen logs left by the storm. Thick branches clawed at her cloak while loose stones shifted beneath every careful step. The forest grew strangely quiet. No birds sang. No squirrels darted between branches. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the trees opened. Before her stretched the abandoned quarry. The place looked wounded. Great slabs of stone had broken free from the cliffs during the storm, leaving fresh scars across the mountainside. Jagged cracks spread through the frozen earth like lightning trapped beneath ice. Near the center yawned a massive hunting pit, almost hidden beneath shattered timber and loose rock. The cries came from below. Mara hurried to the edge. Her breath caught. 8 tiny white wolf pups huddled together beneath fallen beams, their soft fur stained with mud and dust. One struggled beneath a heavy branch. Another shivered beside freezing water slowly collecting at the bottom of the pit. They could not have been more than a few weeks old. One pup lifted its head. Its bright blue eyes met hers. It didn't growl. It simply cried again. Then Mara noticed the shadows. Around the rim of the quarry stood wolves. Not one. Not two. More than 20. Every one of them enormous. Their winter coats shone white against the snow, blending so perfectly with the mountains that they seemed carved from the landscape itself. Golden eyes watched without blinking. They formed a silent circle around the pit. None crossed its edge. None attempted to climb down. Several pawed anxiously at the frozen ground before stepping back again. Only then did Mara understand. They wanted to reach the pups. They couldn't. A sudden shout echoed behind her. Mara! She turned. 3 hunters emerged from the trees carrying boughs. Their faces drained of color the moment they saw the wolves. One lowered his weapon with shaking hands. Come away from there. They'll kill you. Another pointed toward the pit. Leave them. They're wolves. Mara looked down once more. One of the smallest pups had stopped crying. Its tiny body barely moved beneath the fallen timber. The icy water continued rising. She slowly untied the rope coiled around the bundle of firewood she had carried from the village. One hunter stepped forward. What are you doing? She tested the rope with both hands. I'm bringing them out. The oldest hunter stared at her as though she had lost her mind. The wolves are waiting. No, Mara answered quietly, her eyes never leaving the frightened pups. They're hoping. Without another word, she looped the rope around the trunk of an ancient pine rooted beside the quarry, tightened the knot with steady hands, wrapped the other end around her waist, and stepped over the edge into the darkness. For a single heartbeat, the world seemed to disappear. Snow, sky, wolves, and mountains slipped out of sight as Mara lowered herself into the darkness. The rough rope burned against her palms, its coarse fibers scraping her skin with every careful step. Loose pebbles tumbled beneath her boots and disappeared into the shadows before striking the ground with hollow echoes. Cold air rose from the depths like the breath of the mountain itself. It carried the smell of wet stone, broken roots, and earth that had not seen sunlight in many years. Above her, the opening looked smaller with every passing moment. 20 pairs of golden eyes watched without moving. Not one wolf made a sound. Even the hunters stood frozen near the edge, unable to understand why the pack remained so strangely calm. Halfway down, the wall beneath Mara's right foot shifted. A slab of rock broke loose. She instinctively tightened her grip. The stone crashed into the pit below, exploding into smaller fragments. The sudden noise sent the pups scrambling in every direction. Tiny cries filled the darkness. "It's all right," Mara whispered, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm coming." She continued lower. Her boots finally touched solid ground with a dull splash. The floor of the pit was colder than winter itself. Thin streams of icy water trickled through broken stone, gathering into shallow pools that reached her ankles. The recent storm had opened hidden cracks beneath the mountain, allowing freezing water to seep steadily inside. She looked around. The collapse had been worse than it appeared from above. Massive beams from an old hunting platform had crashed into the pit decades ago, and now fresh rocks from the landslide pinned them down even harder. The pups had become trapped beneath this tangled maze. One tiny wolf whimpered weakly beneath a thick branch. Another struggled to free a hind leg caught between two rocks. The smallest of them lay almost motionless beside the rising water. Mara knelt immediately. Her cloak soaked through the moment it touched the icy ground. "Easy now." She reached toward the nearest pup with slow, careful movements. The little wolf flattened its ears. Its small body trembled violently. Its lips pulled back just enough to reveal tiny white teeth no larger than grains of rice. It wanted to be brave. Instead, exhaustion stole what little strength it had left. Mara slipped off one glove. Her fingers were already numb from the cold. She extended her hand without forcing it closer. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, the tiny nose twitched. The pup leaned forward. Warm breath brushed across her fingertips. Another heartbeat passed. Finally, the frightened little wolf rested its head against her hand. The fear inside its bright blue eyes softened. Above the pit, several wolves shifted their weight. One large female released a low, anxious whine. Another lowered its head until its nose nearly touched the edge. The hunters stared in disbelief. "They're letting her touch them," one whispered. "Impossible." Mara gently lifted the first pup free. It weighed almost nothing. She tucked it inside the folds of her cloak, where a little warmth still remained. The tiny animal pressed itself against her chest, shivering uncontrollably. She could feel its heart racing. "It's going to be all right." Her voice echoed softly against the stone walls. One by one, the other pups turned toward her. Their frightened cries slowly faded. Somehow, they understood. She wasn't another danger. She had come to help. The first trapped branch refused to move. Mara planted both boots firmly against the frozen ground and pushed with everything she had. The old timber groaned. It shifted only an inch. Again. She pushed harder. Pain shot through her shoulders. Her breathing became uneven. Finally, the heavy branch rolled aside. A tiny white pup scrambled free, stumbling directly into her lap. She laughed quietly despite the cold. "There you are." The pup answered with a weak squeak before licking the sleeve of her cloak. Far above, one of the great wolves released a deep breath that almost sounded like relief. Hours seemed to pass inside the darkness. One trapped paw after another. One frightened pup after another. Each rescue demanded patience instead of strength. Sometimes Mara cleared loose stones one at a time. Sometimes she crawled beneath unstable beams, ignoring the dust that fell from the cracked ceiling above. Each movement risked another collapse. Still she refused to hurry. Every frightened animal deserved calm hands. Not panic. When she reached the third pup, She discovered its front leg pinned beneath a sharp slab of granite. The little wolf whimpered whenever it tried to pull free. Blood stained the white fur around its paw. Mara swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." She wrapped both hands beneath the stone. It barely moved. She adjusted her footing. Her boots slipped. Cold water splashed around her knees. Again she lifted. The muscles in her arms trembled. Her back screamed with pain. Little by little, the stone rose. Only an inch. It was enough. The pup jerked its injured leg free before the slab crashed back into place with a deafening boom. The force shook the entire pit. Dust rained from above. Everyone froze. Tiny pebbles bounced off Mara's shoulders. A long crack crept across the cliff wall. One of the hunters shouted from above. "The walls are breaking. You have to come back." Mara looked upward. The opening seemed farther away now. Fresh snow slid over the edges. She knew they were right. The pit was becoming more dangerous every minute. Then another tiny cry reached her ears. She turned. Near the deepest corner, half hidden beneath shattered beams, the smallest pup struggled to breathe. Its body was trapped beneath a thick log darkened by years of damp earth. Leaving now meant leaving it behind. That thought never truly became a choice. She walked toward it. Above, the wolves began pacing nervously. Their paws carved restless circles into the snow. Still, not one of them climbed into the pit. Not one growled at the humans. It was as though an invisible law held every creature exactly where it stood. Mara looked around for anything she could use. Her eyes settled on the cloak wrapped around her shoulders. It was old. Patched countless times. The only warm clothing she owned. Without hesitation, she removed it. Cold air struck instantly. The winter wind pouring through the opening cut through her thin dress until even breathing hurt. Working quickly, she tore long strips from the heavy wool. She braided them together with surprising skill, creating strong slings wide enough to cradle each pup safely. The first sling was ready. Mara gently placed the healthiest pup inside. She tugged twice on the rope tied around her waist. The signal reached the hunters. "What now?" one shouted. Before Mara could answer, something extraordinary happened. The largest white wolf stepped toward the edge. The hunters reached for their bows. The wolf ignored them completely. It leaned over the pit. Mara slowly lifted the sling upward. For one impossible moment, human and wolf stared at each other across the darkness. Then the great wolf carefully closed its powerful jaws around the cloth. Not the pup. Only the cloth. With astonishing care, it backed away. The sling rose smoothly into the air. The frightened pup disappeared over the edge. A heartbeat later, a joyful little yelp echoed down from above. Safe. The first one was safe. Mara smiled despite the freezing cold. "Good," she whispered. "Let's save the rest." One after another, she filled the makeshift slings. Each time, a different wolf stepped forward. Each lifted its precious burden with the gentleness of a mother carrying her newborn. Not once did sharp teeth touch soft fur. Not once did a pup cry in fear. Above, the hunters watched with mouths hanging open. One lowered his bow completely. "I've hunted these mountains for 30 years. He whispered. "I've never seen wolves trust a human." Neither had anyone else. The sixth pup reached the surface. Then the seventh. Hope began replacing exhaustion inside Mara's heart. Only one remained. The smallest. The weakest. Still trapped beneath the old timber. She crawled toward it once more. This time the beam refused to move. She pushed. Nothing. Again. Still nothing. Her breathing became ragged. Cold seeped into every bone. Above her, a sharp cracking sound echoed across the quarry. The hunters looked upward. Fresh fractures raced through the cliff face. Snow poured into the pit like white sand through an hourglass. The wolves suddenly raised their heads together. A long, deep, haunting howl rolled across the mountains. Not one voice. 20. The sound shook the frozen forest. Birds burst from distant trees. Deer fled through the snow. Even the wind seemed to pause. Mara looked up just as another massive crack split the wall behind her. The entire pit shuddered. The final pup cried beneath the timber. And the mountain began to collapse. The first wave of stone came down without warning. A deafening crack split the mountain, followed by a roar so deep it seemed the earth itself had awakened. Chunks of frozen rock broke free from the walls, crashing into the pit with enough force to shake the ground beneath Mara's knees. Dust exploded through the darkness. Snow poured from the opening in thick white clouds. The light above vanished behind a curtain of falling earth. Mara threw herself over the smallest pup. A heavy stone struck the old beam only inches from her shoulder, splintering ancient wood into jagged pieces. Sharp fragments flew past her face, one grazing her cheek and leaving a thin line of blood that quickly disappeared beneath the dust. She closed her eyes, wrapped both arms around the trembling pup, and waited. The mountain groaned. Then, silence. Not complete silence. Water still dripped somewhere nearby. Pebbles continued rolling down broken slopes. Her own breathing echoed loudly inside the confined darkness. Slowly, Mara lifted her head. The pit had changed. Half the opening was gone. Massive boulders blocked much of the daylight, leaving only narrow beams of pale winter light filtering through the gaps above. She looked toward the rope. It hung buried beneath fallen stone. Its upper half had disappeared completely. Her only way out was gone. For the first time since climbing into the pit, fear settled quietly inside her. Not panic. Not despair. Only the calm understanding that she might never leave this place. She looked down at the tiny pup pressed against her chest. Its small body trembled violently. Its blue eyes blinked through the dust. The little wolf let out a weak cry. Mara brushed the dirt gently from its face. "You first," she whispered. "No matter what." Above the blocked entrance, muffled voices called her name. "Mara. Can you hear us?" She answered as loudly as she could. "I'm alive." Relief spread through the voices overhead. Then another shout followed. "We can't reach you." The fallen cliff had buried nearly everything. The hunters tried moving rocks with their hands, but each stone seemed to weigh as much as an ox. Even if they worked until nightfall, it would not be enough. The wolves stood among them, still silent, still watching. The largest white female stepped toward the collapsed opening. She sniffed the fresh stone. Her ears twitched. Then she raised her head toward the northern mountains. A long, haunting howl rose into the grey winter sky. Another answered. Far away. Barely audible. Then another. And another. The calls rolled across the mountain ranges like waves moving through an endless sea. Ash Hollow had heard wolves howl before. Never like this. This wasn't hunting. It wasn't warning. It was a summons. Within minutes, distant shapes began appearing between the snow-covered pines. 1. Then 3. Then 10. Soon dozens of white wolves emerged from every direction. They crossed frozen streams, leaped over fallen trees, slipped silently between ancient rocks. Their coats blended so perfectly with the snow that they seemed like spirits drifting through the forest. The villagers who had followed the hunters froze in disbelief. No one dared move. Children hid behind their parents. Old men removed their hats. No one had imagined so many wolves still lived in the northern wilderness. Yet none of them attacked. Every wolf gathered quietly around the ruined pit. Waiting. Watching. Listening. Inside the darkness below, Mara searched for another way out. The walls around her had become even steeper after the collapse. Every surface crumbled beneath her fingers. She found only loose stone and slick mud. There would be no climbing. A soft whimper reminded her why she couldn't stop moving. The final pup still lay beneath the broken timber. The collapse had shifted the heavy beam just enough to pin its tiny hind leg more tightly than before. Mara knelt beside it once again. The little wolf looked exhausted. Its breathing had become shallow. She ran gentle fingers through its snowy fur. So much courage. The pup answered by weakly licking her wrist. A small smile crossed Mara's face. Even here, surrounded by darkness, life still reached for kindness. She studied the beam carefully. Moving it by strength alone was impossible. Instead, she searched among the scattered debris until she found a thick branch nearly as long as she was tall. She wedged one end beneath the timber, placed a heavy rock beneath it. A simple lever. The kind her father had taught her years before while lifting wagon wheels from muddy roads. She whispered a quiet thank you to the memory, then pressed down with all her weight. The branch bent. The beam creaked. Nothing. Again. She pushed harder. Her boots slid across wet stone. The branch groaned. Then, the massive timber lifted. Only a little. But enough. The tiny pup pulled desperately. Its trapped leg slipped free. The heavy beam slammed back to the ground with a thunderous crash. The force knocked Mara backward into the icy water. She gasped as freezing cold rushed through her clothes. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The pup stumbled toward her. Instead of running away, it climbed awkwardly into her lap and buried its nose beneath her arm. Mara laughed softly through chattering teeth. "I think we're both a mess." The little wolf blinked at her. Its frightened eyes seemed calmer now. Almost trusting. She wrapped it inside what remained of her torn cloak. Above, the wolves suddenly became restless. Several began digging at the collapsed entrance with astonishing speed. Huge paws threw snow and rocks aside in every direction. Others dragged fallen logs toward the pit. The hunters stepped back in confusion. What are they doing? No one answered. Because no one understood. The wolves worked together with silent precision. Some cleared loose rubble. Others pushed heavy stones that would have taken 6 men to move. Young wolves carried smaller rocks away while the older ones widened the narrow gaps left by the collapse. There was no fighting. No confusion. Each animal seemed to know exactly where it belonged. The villagers watched in complete silence. One elderly woman whispered with tears filling her eyes. "They're rescuing her." Even the hunters lowered their weapons. Hours earlier, they had expected blood. Instead, they were witnessing loyalty. Deep beneath the mountain, Mara heard faint scratching above her. She looked upward. Or something was digging. Hope returned like the first warmth after a long winter. She held the final pup close. "We're not alone." Time passed slowly. The cold grew worse. Darkness deepened. Her hands had become so numb she could barely feel them. Still, she stayed awake. If she slept, the mountain's cold might never let her wake again. Then, a different sound echoed through the tunnel. Not scratching. Footsteps. Heavy. Steady. Deliberate. They came from somewhere behind her. Not above. Not from the blocked entrance. From deeper inside the mountain. Mara slowly turned. Only darkness greeted her. She reached for a broken branch, gripping it like a walking staff. The little pup remained tucked against her chest. The footsteps grew closer. One. Then another. Water rippled across the shallow pools. A faint breath drifted through the darkness. Not human. Larger. Calmer. A pair of silver eyes appeared first. Bright. Ancient. Watching without fear. Then a massive shape emerged from the shadows. The wolf was unlike any she had ever seen. He stood taller than the others by nearly a full head, his thick white coat streaked with silver that shimmered even in the dim light. Old scars crossed his shoulders and muzzle, not fresh wounds of reckless battles, but the marks of a guardian who had survived countless winters. His amber eyes carried neither anger nor hunger. They carried memory. He stopped only a few steps away. The final pup lifted its head at once. A tiny cry escaped its throat. The great wolf lowered himself onto one knee. Not in weakness. In respect. Mara remained perfectly still. The branch slowly slipped from her fingers. The giant wolf looked first at the rescued pup, then at the blood on Mara's scraped hands. Finally, he bowed his head until his nose gently touched her trembling fingers. At that same moment, every wolf above the mountain fell completely silent. It was as if the entire Frostfang pack had been waiting for this single moment. Then the Silver Guardian turned his head toward the darkness behind him. Without a sound, he took a slow step into a narrow passage hidden inside the mountain, before looking back at Mara, silently asking her to follow. For several long moments, Mara did not move. The narrow passage behind the great silver wolf disappeared into complete darkness, where even the faint winter light could no longer reach. Cold air drifted from its depths, carrying the scent of damp stone, pine resin, and something older, a fragrance that reminded her of forgotten places untouched by human hands. The wolf waited. He did not growl. He did not step closer. He simply watched her with quiet patience. The tiny pup tucked inside her torn cloak lifted its head and released a soft whine. Mara looked toward the blocked entrance above. The muffled sounds of digging continued. The villagers and wolves were still trying to reach her. But every minute the mountain settled farther, sealing the opening with fresh rock and frozen earth. If she remained where she was, they might never reach her. The silver wolf seemed to understand. He turned once more toward the hidden tunnel. His broad tail brushed gently across the stone floor before disappearing into the darkness. Mara drew a slow breath. "I suppose you know a way out." The wolf glanced back. His amber eyes reflected the faint light like polished gold. That was answer enough. Holding the rescued pup close against her chest, Mara followed. The tunnel narrowed quickly. Its ceiling forced her to bend low, and loose water dripped steadily from ancient cracks overhead. The walls glittered with tiny crystals that caught what little light remained, making the stone shimmer like stars trapped beneath the mountain. The only sounds were their footsteps. The wolf moved almost silently. Mara's boots splashed through shallow pools, each echo rolling far ahead into unseen darkness. After several minutes, the tunnel widened. The air changed. It no longer smelled of damp earth alone. There was moss, running water. Fresh pine carried on a faint breeze. Somewhere ahead, an opening. The silver wolf stopped beside a smooth stone wall. He pressed his shoulder gently against it. Nothing happened. Then, with a deep grinding sound, the ancient slab shifted. Dust drifted through the air as a hidden doorway slowly opened. Mara stared in disbelief. Beyond it stretched a vast underground chamber unlike anything she had ever imagined. Crystal-clear water flowed through a quiet stream that crossed the cavern before disappearing beneath another archway. Great roots from trees growing high above twisted down through the ceiling like pillars, wrapping themselves around enormous stone columns carved with symbols softened by centuries. Hundreds of tiny glowing flowers covered the cave floor, their pale blue light washing the chamber in a peaceful glow. It felt less like a cave, and more like a forgotten sanctuary. The silver wolf stepped inside first. He lowered his head beside the stream, taking only a brief drink before looking back toward Mara. She entered slowly. Every footstep felt almost disrespectful. The silence here was different. Not empty. Alive. As if the mountain itself remembered every soul who had ever walked these halls. She knelt beside the stream and cupped icy water into her hands. The pup drank eagerly. Only then did she notice the carvings. Entire walls had been covered with them. Humans. Wolves. Mountains. Moons. Kings. Not scenes of battle. Not hunts. Not conquest. They stood together. A child offered bread to a wolf. A king rested one hand upon the neck of a great white guardian. Families crossed snowy valleys while wolves walked beside them instead of behind. Mara rose slowly. Her fingertips brushed one of the carvings. Though worn by time, every line had been shaped with extraordinary care. The figures almost seemed ready to move. The silver wolf walked beside the largest carving. It stretched nearly from floor to ceiling. At its center stood a woman wearing no crown and carrying no weapon. Around her sat 8 young wolves. Behind them stood one enormous wolf marked by a crescent moon upon its brow. The moment her fingertips brushed the worn leather, a memory not her own flooded her mind. Snow. Thousands of wolves standing across a frozen valley. Children laughing as they ran between them. A king kneeling before an old woman dressed as a healer. A promise spoken beneath the northern lights. As long as kindness walks beside courage, neither human nor wolf shall rule alone. The vision vanished. Mara staggered backward. Her hand flew to her chest. Her breathing became uneven. The silver wolf stepped closer immediately. He pressed the side of his face gently against her shoulder until her breathing slowed again. "You knew," she whispered. You've been protecting this place. The great wolf blinked once. His calm eyes held centuries of quiet sorrow. Before Mara could gather her thoughts, a distant sound drifted through the cave. Metal. Boots. Voices. The silver wolf's ears stood upright. Every muscle in his body became perfectly still. Outside. Someone had entered the mountain. Not villagers. Soldiers. The peaceful silence shattered beneath the harsh clatter of steel boots striking stone. Torchlight flickered through the far entrance of the cavern, throwing long shadows across the glowing flowers. Deep voices echoed against the ancient walls. This way. The tracks lead inside. Search every tunnel. The silver wolf moved instantly. He stepped between Mara and the approaching voices. Not aggressively. Protectively. His thick shoulders blocked the narrow passage while his amber eyes never left the darkness ahead. Mara instinctively pulled the pup closer. The little wolf sensed the danger. Its ears flattened. Its tiny heartbeat raced against her arm. More torches appeared. Then armored men. At least 20. Their heavy cloaks bore the black hawk crest of Lord Garrick, the most feared noble in the northern provinces. Their captain entered first. His face was hard from years of cruelty, his beard neatly trimmed, his sword polished to a mirror shine. He scanned the chamber. His eyes widened when they landed upon the silver wolf. So, he said quietly, the stories were true. Behind him, another rider stepped into the light. Unlike the soldiers, this man wore armor decorated with silver edges and a crimson cloak lined with thick winter fur. His narrow eyes studied the carvings with greedy fascination before settling upon Mara. A slow smile spread across his face. Lord Garrick. The man whose taxes had emptied villages. Whose hunters had slaughtered wolves for sport. Whose ambition had poisoned every valley under his rule. So this is the girl. His voice echoed through the chamber like cold iron. The one the wolves protect. He looked at the silver guardian. Then at the frightened pup in Mara's arms. Finally, his gaze settled on the ancient book resting upon the stone altar. His smile widened. Excellent. He slowly drew his sword. I've been searching for this place for 20 years. The silver wolf lowered his head. A deep growl rolled through the sanctuary for the very first time. Not loud. Not wild. But ancient. Powerful enough to make every torch flame tremble. Lord Garrick only smiled wider. He lifted one hand. 20 soldiers raised their crossbows. The peaceful sanctuary that had survived centuries of silence suddenly stood on the edge of war. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. The soft glow of the blue flowers shimmered across polished armor and ancient stone alike, turning the sanctuary into a place caught between peace and violence. Water continued to flow through the narrow stream, its gentle murmur strangely calm against the metallic click of crossbows being drawn. Mara stood frozen beside the stone altar. The rescued pup pressed deeper into the folds of her cloak, trembling so hard that she could feel every tiny heartbeat against her ribs. Between her and the soldiers stood the silver guardian. His broad shoulders rose and fell with slow, measured breaths. He did not bare his teeth. He did not lunge. He simply stood his ground, as though the mountain itself had given him the task of protecting everything behind him. Lord Garrick studied him with hungry eyes. So many years, he murmured. So many wasted years chasing stories. He took another slow step into the chamber. I knew there had to be more than beasts hiding in these mountains. His gaze wandered over the ancient carvings. The old kingdom buried its greatest secret well. One of the younger soldiers glanced nervously toward the wolves carved into the walls. My lord, perhaps we should leave this place. Garrick's smile disappeared. Without warning, he struck the young soldier across the face with the back of his gloved hand. The crack echoed through the cavern. The soldier stumbled to one knee. No one leaves, Garrick said coldly. Not until every secret buried here belongs to me. Silence followed. Even his own men lowered their eyes. Mara had heard stories about Lord Garrick all her life. People whispered that entire villages had vanished after refusing his taxes. Hunters claimed he paid more gold for a wolf's pelt than most families earned in a year. Others said he had burned forests simply to flush out creatures he could not control. Looking into his eyes now, Mara realized the stories had not been cruel enough. There was no warmth behind them. Only possession. Everything he saw became something he wished to own. His attention returned to Mara. "You've done something remarkable." He smiled as though offering praise. "The wolves trust you." Mara remained silent. "They lowered their heads to you." Still she said nothing. His smile faded. "Tell me how." The only answer came from the soft rush of the underground stream. Garrick sighed. "I had hoped this would be easier." He lifted one finger. 2 soldiers stepped forward. The Silver Guardian moved instantly. His deep growl filled the chamber again. Every torch flickered. Every horse outside the cave screamed in panic. The soldiers hesitated. No one wished to become the first man to test that growl. Garrick noticed. His expression hardened. "Cowards." He snatched a spear from one of his guards. Without warning, he hurled it. The weapon sliced through the air. The silver wolf twisted. The spear missed his heart by inches but tore across his shoulder instead, disappearing into the stone behind him with a shower of sparks. A dark line spread through the white fur. Blood. The great wolf did not cry out. He only planted his paws more firmly against the ground. Mara gasped. "No." She rushed forward before fear could stop her. The Silver Guardian instinctively shifted sideways, placing his wounded body between her and the soldiers once again. Blood dripped steadily onto the ancient stone floor. Bright crimson against pale rock. Something changed inside the chamber. The glowing flowers surrounding the stream slowly dimmed. The water that had flowed peacefully moments earlier began to ripple. The sanctuary itself seemed to mourn the wound. Lord Garrick noticed the change. His eyes lit with excitement. "You see," he whispered to his men. "This place is alive. Imagine what power sleeps beneath these mountains." He pointed his sword toward the altar. "Take the book." 4 soldiers obeyed. The moment the first boot crossed the circle carved into the floor, a deep rumble rolled through the cavern. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The ancient pillars trembled. The soldiers stopped. One looked upward. "My lord." Another rumble answered him. This one stronger. Hairline cracks spread slowly across the stone above. The Silver Guardian never looked away from Garrick. It was as though he already knew what was happening. Mara remembered the vision she had seen when touching the book. A promise. A covenant. A bond between compassion and courage. Not conquest. Not greed. She looked at the altar. Then at Garrick. "You don't understand." Her voice echoed gently through the chamber. This place was never built to hide power. Garrick laughed. "No. It was built to protect it." Another crack split the ceiling. Small stones began falling into the stream. The soldiers shifted uneasily. One took an involuntary step backward. Garrick ignored every warning. "Enough." He marched toward the altar himself. "If no one else has the courage." The sentence never ended. The moment his hand touched the ancient book, a blinding white light burst from the altar. Not fire. Not lightning. Something softer. Older. The entire sanctuary glowed. Every carving along the walls shone like moonlight. The wolves carved into stone seemed almost alive. Garrick cried out and stumbled backward. The book slipped from his fingers before he could lift it. The light vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Darkness returned. Only the glowing flowers continued shining. Lord Garrick stared at his empty hand. A long red burn stretched across his palm. His face twisted with fury. "You!" His voice shook with rage as he pointed toward Mara. "It accepted you." He finally understood. Not everything in the world could be taken. Some things had to be earned. His eyes narrowed. "If I cannot claim the covenant." He slowly raised his sword. "I'll destroy the one it chose." The soldiers tightened their grip on their weapons. The Silver Guardian stepped forward despite the blood running down his shoulder. But before either side could move, a single howl echoed through the tunnel outside. Then another. Then dozens more. The sound rolled through the mountain like thunder. Every wolf above the quarry had reached the hidden entrance. The soldiers looked toward the tunnel. Uneasy murmurs spread through their ranks. "My lord! They're coming!" Garrick's jaw tightened. "Seal the entrance." Half his men rushed toward the tunnel. They had barely reached it when enormous white shapes burst from the darkness. The first wolf struck a shield with enough force to send it spinning across the stone floor. Another leaped over fallen rocks without touching a single soldier. They weren't attacking wildly. They were driving the men backward, separating them, breaking their formation. The chamber exploded into movement. Torches fell. Shadows danced across the walls. The echo of paws striking stone mixed with shouted commands. Mara crouched beside the wounded Silver Guardian. Without thinking, she tore another strip from her already ruined dress and pressed it against the bleeding wound. The wolf remained perfectly still. His breathing slowed beneath her hands. "It's deep," she whispered. "You've lost too much blood." The great wolf turned his head slightly. His nose brushed gently against her wrist. Not gratitude. Trust. Then, something extraordinary happened. The 8 rescued pups appeared at the tunnel entrance. Though exhausted and barely steady on their feet, they squeezed between the legs of the larger wolves until they reached Mara. One by one, they gathered around her. The smallest settled against her knee. Another curled beside the Silver Guardian. The others formed a tiny white circle around them both. The great wolves stopped fighting. One after another. They lowered their heads. Not toward the Silver Guardian. Toward Mara. The soldiers stared in stunned silence. Even Garrick forgot to move. Dozens of wolves. The ancient guardian. And now the 8 rescued pups. All bowing before the young woman who had climbed into a pit with nothing more than a rope and a compassionate heart. Lord Garrick's face slowly drained of color. For the first time in many years. The man who feared nothing realized he was standing in the presence of something that could never be ruled by force. And somewhere deep within the mountain, a powerful horn echoed through the hidden passages. The Silver Guardian lifted his head. His weary eyes brightened. Someone else had finally awakened. The deep note of the horn lingered beneath the mountain long after its sound had faded. It was unlike any hunting horn carried by soldiers. Its voice was older. Softer. It rolled through the hidden passages with quiet authority, as though every stone within the mountain recognized it. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even Lord Garrick remained frozen. The wolves lifted their heads together. Their ears stood forward. Not in alarm. In recognition. The Silver Guardian slowly rose despite the blood staining his shoulder. His legs trembled beneath his weight, yet he stood with the same calm dignity that had carried him through countless winters. Mara instinctively reached to steady him. "You shouldn't stand." The great wolf turned toward her. His amber eyes softened. He gently touched her shoulder with his nose before looking toward the dark passage beyond the sanctuary. The horn sounded again. Closer this time. A faint glow appeared deep within the tunnel. Torchlight. Not the harsh orange flames carried by Garrick's soldiers. These lights burned with a warm golden color, steady despite the cold air flowing through the mountain. Footsteps followed. Slow. Measured. Respectful. Several figures emerged from the darkness. They wore no polished armor. Instead, they carried long white cloaks fastened with silver clasps shaped like wolf paws. Their clothing bore the marks of long journeys through snow and forest, yet every movement showed quiet discipline. At their center walked an elderly man whose silver beard reached almost to his chest. His wooden staff was wrapped in carved vines exactly like the one resting upon the ancient altar. When he entered the sanctuary, every wolf lowered its head. The old man did the same. Not to Garrick. Not to the soldiers. To the wounded Silver Guardian. "My old friend," he whispered. His voice carried deep sorrow. "You've protected this place longer than any of us deserved." The Guardian stepped forward. The old man rested one weathered hand against the wolf's forehead. For several moments neither moved. No words were needed. Years of loyalty passed silently between them. Lord Garrick finally found his voice. "Who are you?" The old man looked toward him without fear. I'm Aemon, the last keeper of the Northern Covenant. The name stirred uneasy whispers among the older soldiers. One man quietly lowered his sword. My grandfather spoke of the keepers. Another crossed himself. I thought they had all died. We nearly did, Aemon answered. But promises do not disappear simply because men forget them. His calm gaze settled upon Mara. For the first time that day, a smile touched his tired face. So, it was you. Mara looked around uncertainly. I don't understand. You will. He stepped closer. His eyes rested on the 8 pups gathered around her feet. They chose well. Garrick laughed bitterly. Enough of these stories. He raised his sword. I command these northern lands. I answer only to the crown. Aemon slowly turned. No. His voice remained gentle. You answer to truth. The old keeper struck the base of his staff softly against the stone floor. The sound echoed through the sanctuary. Far above the mountain, another horn answered. Then another. Outside, new voices filled the air. Not soldiers. Villagers. Hunters. Travelers. Word of the collapse at the abandoned quarry had spread across the valleys, and people from neighboring settlements had followed the strange gathering of wolves to the hidden mountain entrance. Among them rode royal guards wearing the blue and silver crest of the High Kingdom. At their head came a large wagon drawn not by horses, but by 2 magnificent white elk. Inside the wagon lay a man wrapped in heavy furs. His face was pale from illness. Silver threaded through his dark hair. Across his chest rested an old sword whose hilt bore the same crescent moon carved throughout the sanctuary. As the wagon stopped outside the cave, every wolf in the valley became completely still. The Silver Guardian walked slowly toward the entrance. Each step showed the pain in his wounded shoulder. When he emerged into the winter light, thousands of snowflakes drifted around him like tiny stars. The man inside the wagon opened his eyes. Though weak, they shone with unmistakable warmth. My friend, he whispered. The Silver Guardian reached him and gently lowered his great head. The king rested a trembling hand against the wolf's brow. Years seemed to melt away. No crown was needed. No announcement. Every person present understood. This was the Alpha King. Not a monster. Not a legend hungry for war. A weary ruler who had spent years protecting a peace most people never knew existed. Mara stepped quietly from the cave carrying the smallest pup. The Alpha King's gaze found her immediately. He smiled. So? The mountain finally answered. She looked at him in confusion. I only tried to save them. And that, the king replied softly, is exactly why it answered. Aemon gathered everyone near the old quarry. The snow had begun falling again, covering broken stones with a fresh blanket of white. Before villagers, soldiers, hunters, and the royal guard alike, he opened the ancient book. Its pages were fragile. Its ink faded. Yet every word remained clear. He read aloud the covenant written centuries before. It told of a time when wolves had guarded mountain passes while humans protected rivers and fields. When children grew beside wolf pups instead of fearing them. When the Alpha Kings ruled not over beasts, but beside them. The covenant carried one unbreakable law. Power could never choose the guardian. Only compassion could. Silence followed. Many villagers lowered their heads in shame. They remembered every cruel story they had repeated. Every frightened rumor they had believed. Every kindness they had refused because fear seemed easier. Lord Garrick's face darkened. Lies. He stepped forward. Old tales written by dreamers. Without warning, he drew a hidden dagger from beneath his cloak and lunged toward the Alpha King's wagon. Everything happened at once. Mara cried out. The royal guards rushed forward. The Silver Guardian moved despite his wound. But they were all too far away. Before Garrick could reach the wagon, 8 white shapes darted through the snow. The rescued pups. Though still young, they threw themselves into Garrick's path with fearless determination. One grabbed his boot. Another leaped against his knee. The smallest clung stubbornly to the hem of his cloak. They could never overpower a grown man. They didn't need to. Their courage delayed him for one precious heartbeat. That heartbeat was enough. The great wolves descended like a winter storm. Not to kill. To stop. One seized Garrick's sword arm without breaking the bone. Another swept his legs from beneath him. The Silver Guardian planted one enormous paw across the noble's chest. Garrick struggled wildly. He shouted. Threatened. Promised gold. Promised titles. No wolf moved. No wolf harmed him further. Justice did not require revenge. It required truth. Royal Captain Rowan stepped forward with 6 guards. He knelt beside the ancient book, reading the royal seals pressed into its pages. His expression changed immediately. He looked toward the Alpha King. Then toward Lord Garrick. Finally he removed the noble's own signet ring. You stand accused of treason against the crown. His voice rang clearly across the snowy valley. The unlawful slaughter of protected guardians. The destruction of royal sanctuaries. And the attempted murder of His Majesty. Garrick's confidence vanished. He looked desperately toward his soldiers. None came. One by one. They lowered their weapons. Some stepped away from him entirely. Others knelt before the king. The lies that had ruled the northern provinces for years crumbled faster than the broken quarry itself. Weeks passed. Winter slowly loosened its grip upon the mountains. Snow melted into sparkling streams. The first wildflowers pushed through the thawing earth. The abandoned hunting pit was transformed stone by stone. The villagers filled its deadly depths with rich soil and planted young pine trees around its edges. What had once trapped innocent life became a place of shelter. Travelers found warm fires there. Orphaned animals healed there. Lost children laughed there. People no longer called it the cursed quarry. They called it Guardian's Hollow. Mara never asked for reward. She returned to her little cottage above Ash Hollow, believing life would quietly return to normal. It never did. Every morning, just after sunrise, 8 growing white wolves appeared outside her door. They waited patiently while she finished feeding the chickens or carrying water from the stream. Then they followed her through the valley like loyal shadows. Children no longer ran from wolves. They laughed as the playful young guardians chased snowflakes through the fields. Old hunters who had once feared the Frostfang pack now left fresh venison at the edge of the forest each winter, bowing respectfully before returning home. The bond broken generations earlier slowly healed. Months later, on the first warm morning of spring, Mara climbed the hill overlooking Guardian's Hollow. Mist drifted gently through the valley below. Sunlight spilled across the mountains, turning the remaining snow into rivers of gold. The 8 wolves now stood nearly full-grown. Their white coats gleamed beneath the rising sun. One after another, they climbed the hill and gathered around her. The smallest, once trapped beneath the fallen timber, rested his head quietly against her hand. From the forest beyond came familiar footsteps. The Silver Guardian emerged between the pines, his shoulder fully healed. Age still showed in the silver woven through his coat, yet his movements carried new strength. Behind him walked the Alpha King. Not surrounded by soldiers. Not carried by servants. Simply walking beside his oldest friend. He stopped a few paces from Mara. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The mountain breeze carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. Birdsong filled the valley where fear had once ruled. Finally, the king smiled. There are many who dream of changing the world with strength. His eyes moved toward the wolves surrounding her. You changed ours with kindness. Mara looked across the valley. Children were planting young trees where the deadly pit had once waited. Travelers shared bread beside wolves resting peacefully in the grass. The sanctuary beneath the mountain would remain hidden, protected not by fear, but by those who finally understood its purpose. She had climbed into darkness believing she was saving 8 helpless pups. She climbed out having rescued something far greater. A forgotten promise. A wounded kingdom. And the fragile bridge between 2 worlds that had always belonged together. As the morning sun rose above the Frostfang Mountains, the wolves lifted their voices in one final, beautiful chorus. This time, no one in Ash Hollow mistook the sound for a warning. They knew it for what it truly was. A song of gratitude. A promise remembered. and the beginning of a peace that would echo through the mountains for generations to come.